Now, for the people at home who don't know who you are, Mrs. Elliott, I was hoping that you would be able to give them a brief synopsis as to how you came up with the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise and how you got into ultimately all of this.
I'm an 85-year-old, uh, lightly melanated female.
Sure.
Who, a long time ago, 51 years ago, realized after the death of Martin Luther King Jr. that even though I had been raised in an all-white community, I saw people of color as the problem. Instead of seeing skin color not the problem, but paleface's reaction to skin color is the problem. People can't change the color of their skin.
Right.
They can change their attitudes, they can change their behaviors. The problem in this country today, and it's gotten worse in the last 5 years, is ignorance.
Right.
The solution to ignorance, these folks aren't stupid, they're just ignorant. You can't change stupid.
Right.
You can change ignorance with education. I'm an educator. The word educator comes from the root dus, which means lead, the prefix e, which means out, the suffix ate, which means the act of, and the suffix or, which means one who does.
Right.
An educator is one who is engaged in the act of leading people out of ignorance. That is what the schools in this country should have been doing for the last 245 years, and it hasn't been being done. We have been perpetuating ignorance deliberately with the help of the people in local, state, and federal governments. And if you haven't read the book, The Color of Law, every person watching this should get that book today and read it.
Right.
Because then you will understand why. This is not de facto segregation we've got going in this country. It's de jure segregation. And it is perpetuated by our lawmakers.
Do you believe that the majority of, I hate to say it, most white people out there who don't understand what's going on is due to ignorance or indoctrination in the school systems, that the school systems isn't educating people properly, and this is what is causing certain individuals to perpetuate racism?
Number one, first, there are no white people on this earth.
Excellent point.
When you look at me, you can see where my skin stops and my shirt begins and my shirt is white.
Right.
This ain't white skin.
Sure.
By any stretch of the imagination.
Right.
There's no such thing as white people. We are all members of the same race, and we all came from those people in sub-Saharan Africa,
Right.
who evolved 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. We are all descendants of those people. You and I are 30th to 50th cousins.
Right.
So, cousin, what was your question?
Well, do you
Do I believe that we are? Do I believe that all melanin challenged people are trained to be racist? Absolutely.
Sure.
And I know that it is expected of us because when I did the blue-eyed, brown-eyed exercise in my classroom in Riceville, Iowa, the day after Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I immediately found out how it feels to teach outside the norm and to teach in opposition to racism. That is not something you are allowed to do in this country. You are forced, if you want to keep your job, to perpetuate the status quo. And the status quo is, if you're white, you're all right. If you're brown, hang around. If you're yellow, you're mellow. And if you're black, get back.
Right.
And that's what we teach in the schools in this country on a daily basis. In this country, what we have is not education. It's indoctrination. And we used to start at the age of 5. Now we start at the age of 3. Because one of our former presidents said, give me a child from the age of 3 to 5 and he'll be mine for a lifetime. And at that point, we started early childhood ed. You think all of these things just happened, or people just have a righteous thinking did these things? No, the person who said that wasn't a righteous thinker. He was saying, if we get them started early, we can keep them thinking this longer. We can subject them to this insanity and to believe in the magic of skin color is to have a slight mental problem.
Right. Would you say it's a mental problem?
I would say it is a learned mental problem.
Right.
Racism is a learned response. Nobody is born a bigot.
Right.
There's no gene for racism. There's no gene for sexism, ageism, homophobia, ethnocentrism. Those are all things you have to be carefully taught. And there was a musical play on Broadway many years ago called, you'll know what it was, and the last song is, You have to be taught to be afraid of people whose eyes are differently made, of people whose skin's of a different shade. You have to be carefully taught.
Right.
You have to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You have to be carefully taught. Everybody needs to see that, they need to hear that, they need to teach that song to children in school.
Yeah.
So that children in school can go home singing that song.
Right.
And then say to their fathers or mothers, see, I was taught not to treat people unfairly on the basis of the color of their skin.